On New Year's Day 2010, Ohio woman Melody Duchesne was taken into custody by Toledo law enforcement following her violent outburst at the drive-thru of a McDonald's restaurant. The 25-year-old became enraged when she was told that she couldn't order chicken McNuggets because the restaurant was still serving breakfast. What followed was captured by CCTV and received considerable media attention in the aftermath. Duchesne, who was intoxicated at the time, reached through the drive-thru window and punched 2 workers in succession. The employees initially struggled to slide the window and keep Duchesne out, but as the scuffle progressed, a manager seemingly tried to pull her inside by her hair. Before speeding off, the young woman grabbed a bottle from her car and hurled it at the glass window, shattering it. The McNuggets-related outburst resulted in Duchesne's arrest for felony vandalism. A few months after the incident, she was sentenced to 60 days in jail and also had to pay McDonald's back for the broken window. Number 8. Travis Treader. In the spring of 2016, Florida man Travis Treader entered the Animal House Pet Center in St. Augustine and asked about the reptiles that the store had for sale. While the employees were distracted, Treader went to a glass enclosure, took out a baby python, and put it in the front pocket of his pants. The store's owner, Steve Silk, suspected the man of having stolen reptiles from him several times in the past months, with the purpose of selling them on Craigslist. The python he'd most recently targeted was valued at nearly $150. The owner and staff went into the office and watched on the security monitors as the theft was unfolding. A worker then tried to stop Treader from exiting the store as he still had the snake in his hands. Treader pushed him out of his way and fled, but another customer, who was an off-duty security guard, prevented him from leaving. Staff and customers took Treader down and secured his hands with cable ties before calling 911. Law enforcement arrived at the scene and arrested him for petty theft and resisting a merchant. Number 7. Heather Underwood. English OnlyFans model Heather Underwood was arrested on an 8-year-old warrant and taken to a station in Stoke-on-Trent in the summer of 2022. Underwood later described the circumstances of her arrest by reporting that she'd woken up one morning to a knock on her door and answered it to find a police officer. They asked if Underwood knew that she was wanted, which she did not. The 32-year-old was arrested. Her shoes and phone were taken off her and she was searched prior to being placed in a cell. Underwood called the entire process degrading, noting the lack of privacy she experienced when she had to use the restroom while in custody, and it only had a glass window. Back when she was living on Leek Road years prior, she'd put her rubbish in black bags, and because the previous tenants had filled the bins, Underwood had simply left her bags next to the bins. The model was then sent a letter by the city council explaining that they'd cleaned up the rubbish because the bags had been ripped open overnight. As per Underwood's account, it was the only interaction she'd had with officials up until the officer coming to her door. She'd learned that a warrant in her name had been active for 8 years for fly tipping, as well as for failure to answer to court, and she was thus taken into custody. The case was thrown out and Underwood was allowed to return home that afternoon. She noted the discrepancy in her arrest for trash bags after such a long period of time, and the fact that she'd called the police 2 weeks prior after spotting a boy armed with a machete, but no officers were sent. Underwood also told a media outlet that OnlyFans was a full-time job, not a quick buck opportunity, and that the arrest had caused her to miss a day of work that she believed would have amounted up to $250. Number 6. Edna Jester. In October of 2008, Edna Jester, an Ohio woman in her late 80s, refused to return a football belonging to her neighbor's children after it had landed in her yard. Consequently, Jester was arrested on charges of petty theft and briefly taken to jail. In December, she filed a lawsuit against the children's parents, Paul and Kelly Tannis, seeking unspecified monetary damages for emotional distress. Jester, who lived in the Cincinnati suburb of Blue Ash, claimed that she'd been affected by playthings belonging to her next-door neighbor's children constantly finding their way in her yard. Kelly, a mother of 5, described the lawsuit as very silly, but also noted that she and her husband were worried because they couldn't afford an attorney. The petty theft charge against the senior citizen was eventually dropped by prosecutors, and she chose to abandon her lawsuit in March of 2009. Number 5. Mark Welch. a Florida teenager, called 911 in the fall of 2012 to report that his dreams were happening in reality and that his family didn't believe him. When asked about his dreams, 18-year-old Mark Welch told a dispatcher, "It's all on paper, I wrote it down." Volusia County deputies were sent to his home, where the teen confessed to smoking K2, a form of synthetic marijuana. While it became apparent that he was suffering from the effects of the drug, Welch wasn't considered to be in need of medical assistance. Before leaving the address, a deputy told him that he'd be arrested if he called 911 again. His family hid their phone from Welch, but roughly 40 minutes after the first call, he went to a neighbor's house and dialed the emergency number once more. He seemed aware that it would result in him being arrested. During his conversation with the dispatcher, Welch asked for a deputy to be sent back to his home, and when questioned about why he wanted to go to jail, said, "I have to prove something to my family." The same deputy that had warned him after the first call took the teen into custody for misuse of the 911 system, a first-degree misdemeanor. He was booked into the Volusia County Branch Jail on a $500 bond. Number 4. David Smith. A Florida man was arrested for rubbing up against a stop sign in April of 2016 in what the police in St. Petersburg described as its most bizarre case to date. For several days, 58-year-old David Smith had been stalking his ex. Between April the 10th and the 13th, he'd walked on foot to the woman's address at night and dumped trash on her property before leaving the area. The incidents were recorded on the victim's surveillance cameras, and the latest trash dump had also been seen by an officer. Earlier in the day, on April the 13th, a witness had spotted Smith simulating intercourse with a stop sign in front of the woman's residence, while pointing at her house and laughing. It wasn't made immediately clear if his actions were meant as a form of revenge or a twisted and ill-advised attempt at getting the woman back. As a result of his disturbing behavior, Smith was arrested on stalking charges. Number 3. Peter Dusek. A 29-year-old Florida man was arrested on May the 20th of 2022 for blowing up the mailbox of a Merritt Island resident over a landscaping payment dispute. 29-year-old Peter Dusek, who reportedly managed lawn care for the neighborhood, had gone to a First Street address to collect payment for services he'd provided for a previous homeowner. The man in question had told Dusek to meet him at the residence on Friday at 2 p.m., but the landscaper showed up on Thursday. He talked to the man's mother, who reiterated that her son wasn't home. Dusek returned to his SUV and started driving down the road before he turned back and left something in the mailbox. It exploded minutes later, bending a street sign next to it and throwing shrapnel roughly 50 feet from the blast zone. No one was hurt, but debris landed only feet away from a neighbor who was outside when the explosion occurred. At the time of the incident, Dusek was already on parole for a previous sentence and was listed as a violent felony offender of special concern. The mailbox bombing was witnessed by several neighbors, and their reports were corroborated by footage from surveillance cameras. The device Dusek had used was reported as a manufactured, destructive device that was not put together hastily. He faced several charges that included discharging a destructive device, possession to destruct a device to cause bodily harm, and possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. Number 2. Carrie Harkness. On December the 18th of 2010, state troopers were called to the Country Fair Market in Meadville, Pennsylvania, where a clerk reported that a woman had entered a walk-in freezer and refused to leave. She was identified as 23-year-old Carrie Harkness, who was with an unnamed female companion. Law enforcement elicited the latter's help in getting Harkness out of the freezer, and when the clerk opened the door, the woman asked her if she'd urinated inside, to which Harkness responded affirmatively. A trooper then found what appeared to be frozen liquid on the freezer floor and also splattered on boxes containing bagels, 2 bite cakes, and packaged cookies. Harkness was arrested on a charge of misdemeanor criminal mischief, but in February of the following year, pleaded guilty to the reduced charge of disorderly conduct. She was ordered to pay a fine of nearly $250 by a Crawford County judge. Before we move on to number 1, be sure to stay tuned after, if you aren't done watching They Will Kill You videos just yet, because we have our previous release about female bank robbers lined up for you next. Number 1. Valerie Dixon. In the fall of 2013, a Florida woman was arrested for doing what was officially reported as a vulgar dance in front of a school bus full of children. According to the Lake County Sheriff's Office, 27-year-old Valerie Dixon bent over and started dancing with one hand on her ankle and with the other grabbing her private area. The children reportedly watched the woman as she was twerking and screaming profanities at the bus. Simultaneously, Dixon, who had no fixed address at the time, was spotted by a deputy. She was arrested on a charge of disorderly conduct and booked into Lake County Jail on a $250 bond.
Number 7. Swahili's Pedraza Rodriguez and Melissa Aquino Arias. From August to September of 2017, 2 women were accused of carrying out 3 separate bank robberies, one of which they committed while dressed as nuns. Swahili's Pedraza Rodriguez of New Haven, Connecticut, and Melissa Aquino Arias of the Dominican Republic attempted their first heist on August 28th when they targeted the branch of Citizens Bank in Tannersville, Pennsylvania. The 2 women, one of whom was armed with a handgun, entered the building while donning nuns' habits and immediately demanded cash from the bank's employees. An alarm was subsequently triggered, prompting the robbers to flee without collecting any money. Rodriguez and Arias then plotted 2 additional robberies, both of which were perpetrated in New Jersey. The first occurred in late September of 2017 at the Spencer Savings Bank in Garfield. The women, dressed in headscarves, successfully robbed the bank while holding the tellers at gunpoint. On October the 15th, they descended on an NVE bank in Teaneck for their final robbery attempt. They initially inquired about opening an account with the bank, but were soon recognized by an employee as the alleged Garfield robbers. The workers contacted the police and the women fled the scene, but they were taken in custody later that day. Number 6. Sandeep Kaur. A registered nurse from California performed a string of bank robberies over the course of 2 months in 2014. Following Sandeep Kaur's widely publicized crime spree, the FBI gave her the nickname the Bombshell Bandit. She'd incurred a substantial amount of debt in the years leading up to the robberies. Since November of 2010, Kaur had developed a gambling habit. After traveling to Las Vegas with her cousin for her 21st birthday, she started planning monthly trips to Vegas and subsequently got involved with a variety of moneylenders who bankrolled her worsening addiction. With mortgage payments to make and exorbitant gambling debts to pay off, Kaur's financial situation continued to deteriorate at the beginning of 2014. She ultimately resorted to robbing a bank after a loan shark threatened to hurt her family in the event that she was unable to pay what she owed to them. The first robbery occurred in May of 2014 at a bank in Valencia, when Kaur outfitted herself in a blue tracksuit, a pair of oversized sunglasses, and a wig. She handed the teller a note that stated she would detonate a bomb if the worker failed to comply with her demands. Kaur made off with $21,200 during her first heist, which would be a larger sum than those obtained during any of the other 3 robberies to which she'd eventually pleaded guilty. She was finally caught by police in late July of 2014 after robbing a bank in St. George, Utah. She led officers on a high-speed chase that spanned multiple states and ultimately came to a stop in Nevada. Kaur was sentenced to 66 months in prison for her crimes and was also ordered to pay fines that amounted to $250,000. Number 5. Iconic Facey. A woman by the name of Iconic Facey was arrested in connection to a robbery at the Bank Course South branch in Gulfport, Mississippi. In March of 2019, Facey, aged 37, walked into the bank completely unarmed and handed one of the tellers a note demanding cash. She managed to get away with an unspecified amount of money, but the bank's employees were able to provide law enforcement officials with detailed descriptions of the robber during the ensuing investigation. The workers recounted that Facey looked as if she'd recently undergone plastic surgery to her cheeks, as they seemed to have been artificially enhanced in some way. Multiple tellers recognized Facey from a photo lineup shown to them by police, and the woman was consequently arrested at George Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston, Texas. The suspect had returned to the United States following a brief trip to Mexico, where it's believed she'd used the stolen money to fund further surgical alterations to her face. Authorities learned that Facey had previously robbed an Alabama bank in 2008 and was then convicted under her birth name, Jimmy Maurice Lewis. For that crime, Lewis had served 51 months in federal prison, after which she legally changed her name to Iconic Facey. Following her second robbery, Facey was sentenced to the maximum of 15 years behind bars. Number 4. Samantha Wyatt. The US Bank in Dillsboro, Indiana was robbed by a 26-year-old woman from Ohio on November the 25th of 2019. Samantha Wyatt entered the building alone and slipped a note to one of the tellers. It read, "Take everything out of the top and bottom drawer and tell me to have a great day." And she left the bank with an undisclosed amount of money. A few hours later, local police released a picture of the suspect that was taken from the bank's surveillance footage. On Thanksgiving Day, the authorities received an anonymous tip from someone who believed Wyatt to have been the perpetrator of the robbery. Wyatt was brought in for an interview with investigators, during which she claimed not to have left the state of Ohio on the day of the crime. Butler County Sheriff's deputies subsequently executed a search warrant on Wyatt's vehicle and found 3 money bands commonly used by banks to wrap large bundles of cash. It was also revealed that Wyatt had searched for directions to the US Bank on the day it was robbed, and she ultimately admitted to the crime on December the 9th. She told the authorities that she'd parked at a nearby church and removed her license plate prior to the robbery. After escaping with the cash, she reattached the plate and drove back to Ohio. She was taken into custody at the Dearborn County Law Enforcement Center and faced felony robbery charges. Number 3. Sarah Crosby. After robbing a bank in Laurel, Delaware, a young woman from North Carolina led police officers on a pursuit across state lines while her 4-year-old son was in the car with her. Sarah Crosby, aged 21, carried out the robbery at the Bank of Delmarva on the morning of June the 30th of 2014. She reportedly handed one of the tellers a stick-up note that indicated she was armed, before fleeing with the cash in a white sedan, which was also carrying her young son. She was pursued by officers from multiple Delaware police departments as she made her way down Route 13 towards Maryland. Once the chase crossed into the neighboring state, law enforcement agencies from Maryland became involved in the high-speed pursuit as well. Crosby eventually ran over a set of spike strips that had been planted to intercept her, but continued to drive on her vehicle's rims until officers were able to bring her to a controlled stop on the Salisbury bypass. The weapon used in the robbery was found inside Crosby's car, as was the stolen money. Crosby faced charges in connection to the theft, as well as the ensuing chase, during which she collided with 3 other vehicles, including a Delmar police cruiser. Fortunately, her child wasn't harmed during the incident, and he was taken into protective custody following his mother's arrest. Number 2. Shelby Taylor Wise. After witnessing a woman taking out $75,000 in cash from her account, a bank teller from Houston, Texas, instructed 2 accomplices to target her in a violent robbery. 25-year-old Shelby Taylor Wise was an employee at Wallace State Bank at the time of the incident, which took place on August the 17th of 2018. Wise was stationed near the teller window at which a bank patron carried out a cash withdrawal for $75,000. Wise could be seen on the bank's surveillance tapes watching the woman intently as she conducted the transaction with another teller. At the exact moment the customer left the bank with the money, Wise pulled out her cell phone and appeared to send a text message. As police would later discover, the person who'd received the text was Wise's boyfriend, Trayvon Johnson. Wise was orchestrating a plot to rob the woman of the sizable sum of cash she had in her possession, which was meant for her family's gas station and check cashing business. The robbery was executed by Johnson and an accomplice, later identified as Davis Dowell Mitchell. The 2 perpetrators followed the woman to the gas station in Jersey Village and ambushed her. The gas station security cameras captured the ensuing struggle, during which the woman's husband ran out to help her fight off the 2 men. Both victims were badly beaten during the altercation, and Johnson could even be seen backing into them with his car. After the robbers absconded with the cash, the woman and her husband both required hospitalization for their injuries. Law enforcement was quick in tracking down Johnson and Mitchell, from whom they recovered the stolen money. Both men were arrested and charged with aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. Investigators also discovered that the car Johnson had used during the robbery was registered to a rental car agency and had been leased by Wise, who was also taken into custody and charged with felony robbery. Number 1. Elizabeth Jeannie Holt. following a violent bank heist that resulted in the robber's death. During a shootout with law enforcement, a woman was arrested for aiding in the execution of the crime and obstructing the ensuing police investigation. The robbery in question took place at the Zions Bank in St. George, Utah, on September the 11th of 2014. Benjamin Schroff, aged 37, walked into the bank disguised in a blonde wig and fake beard, while armed with a shotgun and a revolver. He stole an unspecified amount of cash and subsequently took 2 female bank employees hostage. Schroff fled with the money and the 2 hostages in one of their cars and soon became involved in a high-speed chase with officers of the St. George Police Department. Schroff fired multiple rounds at his pursuers, ultimately hitting 3 patrol cars in the process. As the chase continued, local police encountered 38-year-old Elizabeth Jeannie Holt on the side of the road, near where the pursuit was taking place. She claimed to have been feeding the horses at the nearby corral, but officers asked her to leave the area. Schroff eventually jumped out of the stolen vehicle, allowing his 2 hostages to flee to safety. He hid in the weeds and bushes near the Virgin River, and law enforcement officials then released an emergency notification to all nearby residents, who were advised to stay indoors until the fugitive was caught. St. George police were finally able to locate Schroff after multiple hours of searching the area surrounding Washington Fields. A shootout ensued during which the robber was killed. The authorities would later discover that Holt was Schroff's girlfriend and that she'd tried to help him. She was actually near the location of the police chase in order to meet up with the bank robber and facilitate his escape with the money. Investigators also learned that Holt was carrying the same ammunition used by Schroff during the shootout and that she'd sent Schroff's teenage son to bury her rifle in the desert immediately after her first encounter with the police. Holt was charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice and 1 count of aggravated robbery. She was consequently sentenced to 8 months at a correctional facility and was also ordered to perform 200 hours of community service.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather be wrongfully arrested for assault or kidnapped? In a case of mistaken identity, let us know in the comments section below.